She was just a quiet girl from a struggling neighborhood. No fancy degree, no spotlight. But when a billion-dollar tech company was nearly brought to its knees by a mysterious breach, she was the one who solved it. Mira Ellis didn't just crack the code. She uncovered a hidden message, a cry from someone just like her. What happened next turned her from an outsider into a silent force that changed everything. Who is she really, and why did the system choose her? Where are you watching from? Tell us in the comments. Subscribe for more unforgettable stories that touch your soul. Mira Ellis walked exactly 6 steps behind her mother, not because she was told to, but because it made her feel safe. There was something about watching the way her mother moved, quietly, deliberately, through spaces that didn't belong to them, that gave Mira comfort. Her mother never looked up, never flinched at the polished surfaces or the suits rushing past her with coffee and conference calls. She moved like a ghost through the marble corridors of Cronex Technologies, mop in hand, head down, invisible on purpose. Mira had learned young that being invisible wasn't always a punishment. Sometimes it was protection. Sometimes it was power. Every weekday they entered through the employee entrance, a narrow door tucked beside the loading dock. The security guard never even glanced at Mira. He nodded once at her mother and muttered, 34. That meant the same shift, the same floor. Mira peeled off and took her usual spot on the soft bench in the corner of the lobby, legs swinging gently, frayed backpack on her lap. She waited until her mother disappeared into the service elevator before unzipping the backpack carefully, as if it were sacred. Inside was her sketch pad, 2 stubby pencils, and a half-working calculator she'd soldered back together from pieces she found near the trash compactor. She flipped open the sketch pad. The pages were a mess of circuit diagrams, imaginary code, and symbols that only she understood. She wasn't drawing for school or for a grade. She was drawing to think, to breathe. Mira wasn't like the other kids in the apartment complex who played soccer in the cracked parking lot or argued over whose turn it was on the one working tablet. Mira spent her afternoons watching old repair videos on borrowed Wi-Fi and disassembling broken radios from the junk pile out back. Today, she was drawing a memory coil, one that could store electrical charges in micro-intervals and release them without draining power. She had no reason to build it. It probably wouldn't even work. But the idea had crawled into her mind the night before and refused to leave. She shaded in the outer casing, imagined the wiring wrapping around a magnetic core, and tried to guess how she'd build it with the scraps at home. Around her, the lobby buzzed. Shoes clicked, phones rang, tablets snapped open. Important people said important things. Mira let the noise fade to static. Her mind was elsewhere, halfway inside a motherboard she'd never seen, chasing a problem no one had asked her to solve. And then the lights flickered. It was so subtle at first that no one reacted. A moment later, the overheads dimmed again, this time slower, like a breath being held. Then the giant display screen on the lobby wall blinked twice and went black. For a beat, the room held its breath. Then everything fell apart. Phones came out, voices rose. A man at the front desk slammed his tablet against the counter and shouted, "We're locked out?" A woman in a pencil skirt darted across the marble floor, muttering something about a remote command failure. Mira didn't move. She gripped her sketchpad tighter and kept her head down, listening. She heard the word breach. Her eyes snapped to the screen. Still black. She heard someone mention kernel override. Another said malware vector. Mira knew that word. She'd read it in a PDF about ethical hacking that she wasn't supposed to have downloaded. She didn't know everything, but she recognized enough to understand one thing clearly. They were panicking, and no one knew what to do. Mira slid her sketchpad onto her knees and turned to a fresh page. She didn't plan to show it to anyone. It was just a reflex, like scratching an itch. She began writing what she would check first. Isolate the access point, trace the inbound packets, run diagnostics for signature anomalies. Her pencil scratched rapidly. Her mind wasn't guessing, it was running. Processing. She looked up again. The panic had escalated. 2 men near the reception desk were arguing over network permissions. A woman was on the verge of tears, her headset blinking red. Someone yelled into their phone, "This is the client presentation day. We're dead." Mira circled the words client presentation on her page. That felt like a clue. No one noticed her, no one ever did. And that was fine. Better than fine, really. Being invisible meant you could think without being interrupted. It meant you could listen. A man tried a manual override, rejected. Another tried restoring from a backup, denied. People kept trying the same doors, not realizing the building had no exits left. Mira stared at them all. These were the people with badges, with degrees, with titles like engineer and systems architect. And yet, they looked lost. Her heart began to pound. She thought of her cousin last summer trying to connect a broken hard drive to their tiny flat-screen TV. He almost wiped the entire memory. Mira had stepped in silently and rebooted the system from her old USB drive. No one taught her how. She just figured it out. She turned another page and began to diagram what she would do now if she were at that terminal. Not because she thought she could fix everything, but because she was sure of one thing. They couldn't. The realization hit her like a wave. Cold, heavy, electric. All these adults with their suits and titles and Bluetooth headsets, and none of them knew what to do. Her fingers tightened around the pencil. She didn't feel scared. She felt certain. And that terrified her more than anything. Mira stood slowly and took a step forward. She didn't know why. Maybe she was just getting a closer look. Maybe it was instinct. Either way, she found herself on the edge of the scene where engineers were pacing like caged animals. One of them barked, "This can't be internal. We firewalled Zurich after the audit." A woman beside him replied, "It's a ghost protocol. It's too smooth to be brute force." Mira frowned. She didn't know all their terminology, but she knew what wasn't being said. No one was asking where it started. They were looking at symptoms, not the root. She hesitated, then whispered just loud enough for the man nearest her to hear, "Have you checked the socket overflow loop?" The man paused, blinked. "What?" Another turned. "What did she say?" Someone scoffed. "Who let a kid in here?" But one woman, older, composed, wearing a jacket with no name badge, didn't laugh. She just looked at Mira, still, thoughtful. Mira's cheeks burned. She took a step back, gripping her sketchpad like a shield. "I'm sorry," she muttered. "I didn't mean." Then someone else spoke, quiet but clear. "I heard her," said a boy near the back. He looked barely older than Mira. Maybe 12 or 13. His badge said Noah Rivera, intern. "That loop," Noah continued, "it's a valid vector. If the system's recursive encryption misinterpreted the stack, it could have triggered a false override." Everyone stared. The dismissive voices fell away. For one breathless second, Mira wasn't invisible. Then someone said, "Fine, let her try. What else do we have?" Mira froze. Her mother would be furious. She wasn't supposed to talk to anyone. She definitely wasn't supposed to touch anything. Noah stepped closer gently. "You'll need a chair. The console's too high." She nodded, climbed up, her sketchpad clutched in one hand like a lifeline. No one offered help. No one told her what the problem was. That was fine. She didn't need them to. She studied the screen. 5 seconds, 10. Then her fingers began to move, not fumbling, not searching, typing. She wasn't learning, she was remembering. Around her, the adults whispered, "She's in the diagnostic shell." Impossible, that shouldn't even be visible. She authenticated manually, using a personal cipher? Mira didn't hear them. She was too deep now. This wasn't about showing off. This was about listening to the machine. It was broken. And she could hear what it was trying to say. Mira's fingers hovered over the keyboard, just above the enter key, as if the next command wasn't merely a line of code, but a step off a ledge. Behind her, the room was still humming with disbelief. Low murmurs of confusion, amusement, and annoyance folding together like white noise. She didn't look back. She didn't dare. She was in. She knew the diagnostic shell interface like the back of her hand. Not from any manual or guide, but from the dozens of cracked simulations she'd pieced together on an ancient desktop in her kitchen. The screen was a snarl of access denial messages, broken protocols, and blinking red alerts. But Mira didn't flinch. She could feel the structure under the chaos, like bones beneath torn skin. From the edge of her vision, she saw Noah Rivera take a careful step closer. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His silence wasn't like the others. It wasn't dismissive, it was focused. He stood behind her with a kind of quiet readiness, like someone holding a door open for a storm. Mira typed quickly. Her fingers danced across the keys with the confidence of someone who had failed at 1,000 times and learned from every single mistake. She executed a low-level scan, not using the default tools. They were frozen anyway, but building one from the fragments left behind. The system stuttered once, and then blinked back with something unexpected. Partial access to a buried archive. Mira's heart jumped. She followed it. Behind her, someone finally broke the spell. "Is this actually happening?" a man muttered. "She's just navigating it?" "I don't think she's guessing," someone else said quietly. "She's deeper than any of us got," another admitted. Mira didn't respond. She couldn't. Her focus tunneled completely into the machine. She was inside the system's logic, threading through corrupted pathways, moving like a diver through murky water. Her thoughts weren't in words, they were in patterns, in loops and triggers, in exceptions nested inside conditions. She didn't see the screen so much as feel it. Every blink, every lag, every silent rejection told her something. Then the logs began to speak. Lines of code flashed up that didn't belong. Mira paused. There, someone had masked command injections as recovery scripts. Clever. Clean. Subtle enough that even seasoned engineers wouldn't catch it unless they were already suspicious. It was misdirection wrapped in familiarity. And it almost worked. But Mira had seen it before. Not this exact code, but its rhythm, its emotional fingerprint. It stopped her breath cold. Her fingers twitched above the keys. A slow chill crept up her spine as she stared at the malformed lines. There was something hauntingly personal about them. This wasn't auto-generated garbage or black market code bought from a forum. This was handwritten, crafted. And somewhere under the syntax, it whispered a message. "I know this system better than you do, and I'm not here to destroy it. I'm here to prove a point." Mira swallowed. She felt it in her bones. Whoever had written this wasn't trying to crash the system. They were freezing it, holding it hostage. It was a message disguised as a breach, a puzzle inside a trap. She exhaled softly. Her mind raced back to a night 2 years ago when she had first stumbled into a forgotten developer forum buried in the internet's dead zones. She was only 7 then, hunched over a borrowed laptop with a cracked screen, eating crackers while trying to make sense of posts by users who spoke in half code, half poetry. One post in particular had stuck with her. No replies, no likes. Just a cryptic file dump titled, "The door isn't locked. You're just afraid to push." The code she saw now felt like a descendant of that post. She began typing again, slower now, calculated, mapping what she saw not against textbooks, but against memory. She ran a comparative checksum, isolating the corruptions that didn't match native architecture. As the list grew, she noticed something else. None of the inserted anomalies were destructive. They didn't erase. They redirected. Every blocked access path had a hidden backup. Every failure script pointed somewhere unexpected, like breadcrumbs. That was when the realization settled fully in her chest. This wasn't an attack. It was a conversation. Mira blinked, then whispered before she could stop herself. "Someone wants to be found." Noah, who had been standing so still behind her, leaned in slightly. "What did you say?" Mira didn't answer. She was already chasing the logic deeper. Outside the console, the room began to stir again. The engineers who had once rolled their eyes were now circling like curious wolves. The IT lead, a tall man with a sharp tie and an even sharper tongue, stepped closer and muttered, "That override she just used, that wasn't one of ours." "She didn't even use the password field," said another. "She wrote into the system like it was listening." Elias Noah finally spoke up, louder than he meant to. Because she understood it, she didn't guess, she knew. There was a shift then. Not total acceptance, but hesitation, a pause, a wedge of doubt in the room's resistance. Mira didn't notice. She was locked in. The deeper she went, the clearer the attacker's fingerprint became. Mira recognized the logic patterns, recursive loops that mirrored her own style of problem-solving. The code didn't just behave, it spoke in a way that made her heart twist. Whoever had done this saw systems the same way she did. Not as rigid machines, but as breathing things, stories told in logic. That terrified her. Because if someone like her could do this, what did that mean for her? Noah noticed the shift in her posture. The way her shoulders tensed, the way her breathing quickened, almost imperceptibly. "You okay?" he asked softly. Mira didn't look up. "This isn't random," she said, barely audible. "This is personal." Noah nodded slowly, as if he'd suspected but didn't want to believe it. "You think it's someone inside the company?" he asked. "No," she replied. Worse, I think it's someone like me. Behind them, the senior engineers were still arguing over firewall triggers and DNS echoes. One man suggested rebooting the system's mainframe. Another muttered about fail-safes. Camilla Reyes, the woman in the jacket with no name badge, finally cut through them all. "We should at least test what she's suggesting," she said calmly. "You're really taking advice from a child?" someone snapped. Camilla turned to him. "Are you fixing it?" The room fell quiet again. Noah, emboldened, stepped forward. "She's not some kid poking around. She's inside the breach structure. She's parsing logic trees in real time. None of us could even unlock the admin shell. And she's already bypassed it." That was when Julian Crow appeared. He didn't barge in. He didn't shout. He simply arrived, tall, sharp-eyed, dressed in tailored gray with a face carved by power and time. His presence sliced through the tension like a blade. "What is this?" he said, not raising his voice. Everyone turned. The IT lead stammered. We're making progress, sir." Crow's eyes narrowed. "With her?" "She's navigating the system," Camilla offered carefully. "She's a child. She's inside the architecture," Noah said, "and she hasn't triggered a single alarm." Crow stepped forward, looking down at Mira like she was some alien species. "She doesn't have clearance. She's not trained. She shouldn't even be here." Mira didn't respond. Her fingers were still moving, slightly slower now, almost trembling. "She's not causing this," Noah said quietly. "She's undoing it." Julian's face was unreadable. "I want her off the terminal, now." A beat passed. Then something unexpected happened. The terminal screen flickered. A prompt opened, one that no one had been able to reach. The recovery gateway. Camilla leaned in, eyes wide. "That's a direct access route." Mira didn't speak. Her eyes locked on the screen. Her heart pounded. Noah stepped in front of her, placing himself between her and the growing authority around them. "You want progress? This is it. You take her off now. We lose everything." Julian looked like he wanted to argue, but he didn't. Because in that moment, even he could see the truth. Mira wasn't a mistake. She was the system's only hope. And she was just getting started. Mira didn't notice when the room shifted around her. The way the arguments faded into awe, the way adults stopped speaking over one another and started holding their breath. Her mind was deep inside the code now, moving through the debris of what used to be a pristine network. This wasn't like anything she had studied in theory or imagined in her sketches. It was more alive than that, more intricate. Every loop was a heartbeat, every corrupted line a fragment of intention. The system wasn't dead, it was stunned. And she could feel it twitching under her fingers, waiting for someone who knew how to resuscitate it. She adjusted her stance on the chair Noah had pulled for her earlier, her small frame barely tall enough to reach the keyboard even with the boost. The desk was too big, the chair too low, the room too important, but none of that mattered. Her hands belonged here. The keyboard felt familiar under her palms, even though she'd never touched this kind before. She wasn't navigating so much as remembering. Remembering how machines break, and how they whisper for help before they do. Julian Crow hadn't left. He stood in the corner now, arms folded tightly across his chest, watching like a man who'd accidentally cracked open a vault he wasn't ready for. He didn't speak again, but his silence had weight, an unspoken threat or perhaps something more dangerous, curiosity. His eyes flicked from the screen to Mira's shoulders to the frayed edge of her hoodie sleeve. He wasn't looking for answers anymore. He was looking for explanations. How had she slipped through the cracks of his empire? How had no one seen her coming? Camilla Reyes stood closer now, arms at her sides, head slightly tilted. She was watching too, but not like Crow, not like the others. She wasn't waiting to catch a mistake. She was listening. Mira could feel that. A low beep interrupted the air, subtle but unmistakable. Mira had triggered a diagnostic response. The system blinked once, then again. "Something's waking up," someone whispered. Mira didn't lift her head. She knew. She was already 3 layers in. The deeper she went, the more elegant the attack revealed itself to be. This wasn't chaotic. It wasn't even angry. It was deliberate, balanced, like a spider web spun beneath the system's skin. Whoever had done this hadn't been trying to destroy the architecture. They'd rewritten it, like a poet carving a new rhythm into an old song. It was beautiful in a way that scared her. She reached for the terminal's side panel and tapped a sequence of keys that most of the engineers in the room had probably forgotten even existed. A hidden log file blinked into view. It was scrambled on purpose, but Mira didn't flinch. She recognized the pattern. It was a maze, one she'd seen before. Not in exact detail, but in spirit. Her throat tightened. It was a structure designed to simulate user error. A trap, not for intruders, but for defenders, so that every time someone tried to fix it, they'd only make it worse. She'd studied something like it before, on an abandoned forum thread posted years ago by a user with a name made of random hex digits. The thread's title had stuck with her like a splinter. Become the noise, and they'll never hear the scream. That phrase hadn't made sense to her then. It did now. The attacker had designed this system to fail slowly, to mislead those trying to help, to mask the real vulnerability with a chorus of false ones. It was layered deception, recursive traps, logic loops pretending to be recovery scripts. But she could see through it, because she thought like them. Her fingers slowed. For the first time since she touched the keyboard, Mira felt a flicker of hesitation. This wasn't just code anymore. This was philosophy. A message written in logic. A challenge left by someone who wanted to be understood only by someone who shared their language. Noah must have sensed it, her sudden shift in energy. He stepped a little closer, speaking softly so the others wouldn't hear. "You see something?" Mira nodded, but didn't look at him. "I think I know who built this." His brow furrowed. "You mean a group?" "No," she said, barely a whisper. "I mean, someone like me." The words hung in the air like a secret too heavy to carry. Noah didn't push further. He didn't try to reassure her or explain it away. He just stood there, keeping quiet, anchoring her in a room that felt too big, too cold, too adult. Mira kept working. With each new command, the system responded faster. Not better, not fixed, but more aware, as if it recognized her, or recognized the pattern she followed. The screen flashed again, this time with a partial network map. Dozens of nodes, half of them gray, a few flickering red. Mira zoomed in on one labeled Core Root OS Stable, and beneath that she saw it, a tunnel hidden within a non-executable script. She narrowed her eyes. It wasn't just a vulnerability, it was a keyhole, designed for someone who knew where to look. She typed a single word into the command prompt, Echo, and the system blinked again. Not a command, not a trigger, a name. It was the signature she'd seen in that thread years ago. Her chest tightened. This was personal. Whoever Echo was, they weren't just attacking Kronex, they were speaking to her. They had left the breadcrumbs in a voice only someone like her could hear. Behind her, someone finally broke the silence. How is she doing that? Noah answered without looking away. She's not just fixing it, she's reading it. Julian stepped forward now, slowly, like a man approaching a lion he didn't know was caged. "Is it a back door?" he asked, voice low. Mira didn't flinch. "It's a mirror," she said. That silenced even the background murmur of keyboards and whispered suggestions. Julian stared at her. "What does that mean?" Mira hesitated, then turned toward him. "It means someone who thinks like me was here first, and they wanted someone like me to find them." Camilla exhaled slowly. "So what are they trying to say?" Mira's fingers moved again. She decrypted the log. Lines of ASCII text filled the screen, scattered, half-corrupted, but one stood out. It was a timestamp. Not from the present, from 4 years ago. Noah leaned in. "That's before the last system overhaul." Camilla said what everyone else was thinking. This wasn't an attack, it was planted. Mira nodded. She tapped another key, unlocking a hidden subdirectory. Inside it was a single file, no extension, just a name, Fracture. She hesitated, then opened it. The screen turned white. For a moment, everyone thought it had crashed. Then words began to appear, one letter at a time. "The world builds walls for minds like yours. This system is one of them." More text followed. "Break it, then decide what you want to build instead." The room went still. It wasn't a virus. It wasn't a threat. It was a message, left for someone like Mira. Someone who didn't just fix things, but reimagined them. Julian spoke, quieter than before. "Whoever this is, they used us. They used Kronex." Mira nodded once. "They used your framework, your security protocols, your blind spots." Julian stepped forward. "Can you finish this?" Mira looked up at him fully for the first time. "I already started." Then she turned back to the screen and dove deeper. Mira didn't blink as the file continued to unspool across the terminal. one line at a time, like a ghost typing into the machine's bones. Around her, the room felt suspended. No one dared move, as though sudden motion might shatter whatever thread she had found and send the whole fragile system spiraling again. But Mira wasn't afraid of the unraveling. She was used to broken things. What scared her now was how much of this made sense. Each sentence was sharper than the last. There were no threats, no crude language or chaotic vandalism, just cold, quiet logic etched into digital veins. Whoever wrote it hadn't come to cause damage, they had come to leave a trail. And Mira was following it. Noah shifted beside her, careful not to bump her shoulder. "That message," he whispered, "it's like they're talking directly to you." She didn't respond. Her hands kept moving. The file ended with a prompt. "Do you see it now?" Mira exhaled through her nose. The screen faded to black for half a second before lighting up again, showing the core structure of the security interface, its real architecture, hidden beneath layers of distraction and deception. This was the heart of the breach. The moment she saw it, something clicked in her mind like a gear locking into place. "They didn't just get in through the back," she said quietly. "They rewrote the map." Camilla Reyes stepped closer, the faintest trace of disbelief in her voice. "How?" Mira pointed at the root node blinking in the lower corner of the screen. "See that logic chain? It's wrapped in a recursive fold, mimicking the standard response pattern, but it's actually rerouting administrative signals into a ghost buffer, one that no one ever checks because it's classified as low priority." Camilla squinted. "But that would take months of system familiarity, maybe even internal access." Mira nodded. "Years, probably." Julian Crow's voice cut through the air, low and unreadable. Then someone inside Kronex helped them. Mira didn't look up, but her voice was steady. "Or they used to be here." There was a silence so thick it hummed. Camilla crossed her arms. "That means this isn't just a security breach. It's personal." "It always was," Mira murmured. For the first time, she paused and pulled her hands away from the keyboard. She looked around the room, not with fear, not with defiance, but with clarity. These people, these engineers and directors and interns in pressed shirts and anxious expressions, had built a machine meant to keep everything out. And still, someone had slipped through the cracks, like water through stone. Mira understood why. She had spent her life in the shadows of places like this. She knew what it felt like to press your palms against glass, watching people in bright offices do things you dreamed about, knowing no one on the other side would ever turn around and see you. The person who had written this code had felt it too, and they had responded not with desperation, but with elegance. With something designed not just to collapse a system, but to expose its flaws, its blindness, its arrogance. Mira leaned forward and began typing again. She launched a deep diagnostic sweep, something no one had attempted yet, likely because they assumed the breach would only be skin deep. But the more she uncovered, the more obvious it became. This wasn't a data theft. There were no exfiltration logs, no evidence of ransomware deployment. Instead, the attacker had created windows, hidden messages, embedded tests. It was like someone had converted the security shell into a puzzle room, daring anyone capable of understanding it to respond. Each step Mira took deeper into the breach felt more intimate, more deliberate. She recognized patterns in the code that mirrored her own logic quirks, the way she reused specific variable tags or nested conditions to simulate thought processes. It was like looking into a mirror that didn't reflect her image exactly, but reshaped her intent. She tapped into the firewall interface next, her fingers moving more slowly now. Not from uncertainty, but from reverence. It felt wrong to rush this. She knew what she was approaching wasn't just code. It was a manifesto. She pulled up a command log and paused. At the top of the file was a single command that made her breath catch. /silent_root/init observer. Mira stared at the word observer. No one noticed the flicker in her expression. "You okay?" She nodded, but her eyes stayed on the screen. "They've been watching." Camilla looked uneasy. "Watching what?" "Everything," Mira said. "But only certain behaviors, certain kinds of thinking. They weren't just trying to break in. They were trying to find someone." Julian took a step forward, his voice colder now. "Find someone to what? Finish what they started." Mira shook her head. "No, understand them." Camilla stepped around the terminal to get a better look. "That loop, It's not built for destruction. It's a simulation. Mira pointed. Exactly. They wanted someone to step into it, to see if they'd panic, or navigate. Julian muttered something under his breath. You mean they were testing us? No. Mira corrected. They were testing me. Silence again. It was Noah who spoke this time, voice low and deliberate. This whole breach, it was a message, a locked door, but not one meant to keep people out, just to see who had the key. Mira didn't answer. She was already peeling back the next layer. It felt like unearthing a fossil. Delicate, dangerous, precious. The system pulsed beneath her fingertips. She bypassed the final encryption gate with a manual input, something no standard override would recognize. A new file appeared. This one wasn't code. It was a journal entry. Lines of prose, broken by error markers and timestamps. Mira scanned the first few sentences, her heart twisting. They told me I was too much, that I thought too fast, asked too many questions, so I stopped speaking. I stopped asking. But I never stopped watching. If you found this, you already know what it's like to be invisible, to learn in silence, to dream without permission. This isn't sabotage, it's a beacon. Mira sat back slightly, her mouth dry. This wasn't just about Kronex. This was about every child who had ever been brilliant in the wrong room. Every person who had been told their mind didn't fit. She felt her pulse in her fingertips. She read the last line 3 times before she spoke it aloud. Break what breaks you, then build what saves you. The room was still. No one moved. Julian looked more shaken than angry now. His voice was quieter when he finally spoke. What do we do with this? Camilla turned toward him, her expression unreadable. We don't bury it. Julian's jaw tightened. This could destroy the company. Or remake it, Noah said. Depends on who's brave enough to listen. Mira looked up at all of them then. Finally, fully. Her eyes were steady. You can't erase this. It's part of the system now. You can either pretend it didn't happen or build something better. Julian stared at her, like he was seeing her for the first time, not as a child or an anomaly, but as someone real. Someone necessary. Mira closed the final prompt. The system flickered once more, then stabilized. The crisis was over, but something far more important had just begun. Mira sat still in front of the terminal, her hands no longer moving, yet her mind was spinning faster than it ever had. The screen glowed with the words she had just decrypted, words that weren't part of a system protocol, but a message, a declaration. And now that she had read it, she couldn't unsee what it meant. This wasn't just a test of the system's resilience, it was a challenge, not to Kronex, not to the engineers, to her. Break what breaks you, then build what saves you. The line throbbed in her chest like a second heartbeat. Her fingers hovered uncertainly above the keys. For the first time since she'd begun tracing the breach, Mira hesitated, not because she was lost, but because she was no longer sure what it meant to keep going. What if this was more than code? What if it was a door someone had left open on purpose, not for destruction, but for connection? Noah had been silent for a long time, his eyes flicking between her and the screen like he was trying to solve a puzzle without all the pieces. Now, gently, he stepped closer and spoke low, just for her. You're not like them, he said. You don't need to pretend this doesn't mean something. She turned toward him slowly. I think I know who did this, she whispered. Noah's eyes widened slightly. You said that before. What do you mean, someone like you? She looked down at her notebook resting beside the keyboard, its pages bent and smudged, lines of half-finished schematics crisscrossed over old grocery lists and circuit doodles. I think they built this trail for someone who'd understand the pain of not being seen, not just someone smart, someone who got left behind. Noah didn't say anything at first. Then he nodded once. So you're saying it wasn't just a breach, it was a message to you. Maybe not me specifically, she said slowly, but someone like me. Someone who wasn't meant to be part of the system. Someone who had to learn alone, who had to speak a language no one else around them understood. A silence stretched between them, but it was full of meaning. Mira turned back to the screen and opened the system shell again. She bypassed the remaining echo loops with a grace that startled even herself. It wasn't about force anymore, it was about rhythm, pattern, tone. She was having a conversation with someone who had written their truth in binary. The code she unraveled wasn't just logical, it was emotional. Elegant, precise, but unmistakably human. There was nothing random about the breach, and Mira knew now that it hadn't even been intended to shut the company down. It had been designed to be read. Not by just anyone. Only by someone with eyes like hers, ears tuned to the silence beneath the noise. And as that realization settled deeper into her bones, a new kind of fear took root. Because if someone like her had built this and chosen this path, then what stopped her from doing the same someday? What if the world broke her in the same places? What if she gave in to that silence, let it hollow her out until the only way to be seen was to tear something down? She sat back, hands in her lap, the room behind her still filled with murmurs and glances and tension. She didn't hear most of it anymore. All she could hear was that quiet question echoing in her own head. What makes you different, Mira? What keeps you from becoming what they expect you to be? The memory hit her hard and sudden. Late nights in the kitchen with the power out, her mother cooking by candlelight, humming a melody from a place Mira never knew. The time her cousin brought home a broken printer and Mira fixed it before anyone could blink. The first time she soldered two wires together and felt a spark, not just of electricity, but of certainty. Those things were small, but they had kept her from slipping. She glanced sideways at Noah. He wasn't watching the screen, he was watching her. You don't have to carry it alone, he said gently. I'm not scared of the code, she replied. I'm scared I understand it too well. He nodded slowly. That's what makes you the right one to answer it. She smiled faintly, not out of happiness, but out of recognition. She didn't know how he knew the right thing to say. Maybe he didn't. Maybe he was just trying, but it worked. She pulled her notebook closer and flipped to a blank page. She began sketching, not code, not logic gates, just thoughts. Shapes, trees and roots and rivers and signal waves. It wasn't meant for anyone else, just her. But it helped. Behind her, Camilla Reyes was having a hushed, sharp conversation with Julian Crow near the glass wall. Mira didn't need to hear every word to know the tone. Camilla's voice was firm, Julian's was tight, and when she glanced back, she saw his jaw clench the way it had before, when control was slipping through his fingers. Mira returned to the terminal and began isolating the final encrypted layer of the breach. It wasn't a firewall. It wasn't even a lock. It was a signature, an identifier, something she hadn't noticed before because it was designed to blend in, to behave like the system's own native processes. But now that she'd seen the patterns, the logic loops, the flow of thought, she couldn't unsee it. She ran a trace, a subtle one, not enough to trip alerts, just enough to map the origin sequence. And when the trace came back, it didn't point to an external address. It pointed here, to Cronex. Her heart jumped. It's internal, she whispered. Noah frowned. Someone inside? Mira nodded slowly. Or someone who used to be, someone who left a long time ago. Camilla overheard. She stepped in quickly. You found a local signature? Yes, Mira said, but not a current user. Their credentials don't exist anymore. Julian joined them now, drawn by the tension. Who is it? I don't know, Mira said. But whoever they were, they wrote this code like they were still part of the system, like they knew it better than anyone else ever could. Julian's expression hardened. A former developer? Camilla was already checking her tablet. We've had layoffs over the years, quiet exits. Some didn't go well. Mira didn't lift her eyes from the screen. They didn't just leave. They left a message for someone to find. And you found it, Julian said. Not quite a question. Mira nodded. Because I see the world the same way they do. Julian didn't speak for a long time. When he did, his voice was quieter. Do you know what they want? Mira paused. Then, to be understood. Camilla folded her arms. And if we ignore them? Then they'll do it again, Mira said. Somewhere else, in a different system. One you won't see until it's already broken. Julian let out a breath and turned toward the glass. Outside, the city shimmered, towers of steel and light flickering against the night sky. Inside, a girl in a hoodie sat at a console, worth more than everything she owned. And she was the only one in the room who understood what had really happened. Not a hack. Not an intrusion. A call. And now it was her choice whether to answer it. She looked back at the message one last time. Then she typed a response, not in commands or code, but in the same strange syntax the original message had used. I see you. She pressed enter. The screen blinked, then went still. No alerts, no failures, just quiet. And Mara for the first time felt it too, not silence as punishment, but silence as peace. She turned to Noah. "It's over." He smiled softly. "You sure?" She nodded. "They know," someone answered. From across the room, Camilla watched her, curious, maybe even moved, but she said nothing. Julian turned back toward them, his face unreadable. "What now?" Mira stood up, clutching her notebook to her chest. "That depends," she said calmly, "on whether you want to pretend none of this happened or build something that makes sure it doesn't happen again." Julian stared at her. Then, slowly, he nodded, and for the first time in years, a door no one had noticed finally creaked open. Julian Crow stood at the far end of the operations floor, unmoving, arms crossed, the glow of the monitors reflecting faintly in his eyes. He wasn't watching the screens. He was watching her. This strange, quiet girl who had walked in from nowhere, stepped up to the terminal like it was her second home, and peeled back a system he'd paid millions to protect like it was a piece of fruit. Mira Ellis. He hadn't even known her name until 20 minutes ago. Now he couldn't stop repeating it in his mind. Not because she had embarrassed his entire engineering division. Not because she had solved what no one else could. But because she had understood something none of them had even seen. And that, more than the breach, more than the potential fallout, was what unsettled him. Julian Crow had built Cronex from the ground up. He remembered the cheap server racks in his college apartment, the all-nighters running on vending machine caffeine and idealism, the nights he'd told himself they were going to change the world. He remembered the first major contract, the first serious boardroom, the first time someone called him Sir. That's when things started getting quiet inside him. Not calm, quiet, like a room with the windows sealed shut. That's what power did to people. It made them stop listening. Until someone like Mira came along. Until someone cracked open the silence. Behind him, Camilla Reyes was already coordinating with the internal team, preparing to debrief the board, drafting contingencies and explanations, and maybe, if they were lucky, an acceptable scapegoat. Noah hovered nearby, a bridge between worlds, the only one who seemed to understand Mira wasn't just a one-time miracle, but something else entirely. A signal. A rupture. A beginning. Julian's phone buzzed. He ignored it. His mind was back in Aveline. The orphanage, a dirt path, a girl with dark hair and oil-stained hands, crouched over a radio she'd pulled from a trash pile, soldering wires while the sun set behind the cracked roof. She couldn't have been more than 9. She never said much, but he remembered how she looked up at him once, just once, like he wasn't just a boy dropping off food scraps, but someone who might understand what she was trying to do. And then she was gone. No record, no call, no goodbye. Just gone. He'd forgotten her for years. Buried the memory in layers of achievement, meetings, spreadsheets, buyouts. But now he couldn't stop thinking about her, because Mira reminded him of that girl. The same quiet fire, the same refusal to perform for the sake of approval. He walked away from the glass wall and stepped back into the main operations room. Mira was sitting again, sketching in her notebook. The room buzzed gently, people whispering, but no one interrupted her. They didn't treat her like a novelty anymore. She had crossed the line from curiosity to force. Everyone could feel it. "Miss Ellis," he said softly. She looked up, not startled, not deferential, just patient. "Yes?" He hesitated. "Would you walk with me?" She looked at Noah, who gave her a small nod. Then she stood, tucking her notebook under her arm. They walked through the hallway in silence. The overhead lights hummed. The buzz of servers and ventilation echoed faintly from behind closed panels. Mira didn't ask where they were going, she just followed him. And Julian wasn't sure why he'd asked her to come, only that it felt necessary. When they reached the executive elevator, he pulled out his badge and scanned it. The doors opened. They stepped inside. The ride was quiet. They emerged on the top floor, where the air felt different, colder, heavier, less oxygen, and more tension. This was where the real decisions got made, where appearances mattered more than intention. But Julian didn't take her to the boardroom. He took her to his office. It was large, polished, sterile. Every surface gleamed, every object perfectly placed. But it felt wrong, distant, like the life had been scrubbed out of it. Mira stood in the middle of the room, quiet, looking around. Her eyes landed on a photo frame on the side desk. A girl, maybe 5, sitting on someone's shoulders, laughing. The base was engraved, Amelia, 4:03 a.m. Welcome to the world. She said nothing, just waited. Julian walked to the desk and leaned on it slightly. For a long time he said nothing. Then, finally, I almost had someone like you once, a long time ago. Mira didn't reply, but her expression softened just enough. She used to sit behind the kitchen, fixing things no one wanted, radios, toy cars, a fan that only worked if she hit it twice and turned it sideways. He chuckled dryly. She never said a word unless it was about circuits. What happened to her? Mira asked. I don't know, he admitted. One day she was just gone. Mira lowered her gaze. That happens a lot. He nodded. I didn't know how to see her back then. I only knew how to admire her in silence from a distance. Thought it was enough. She glanced at the frame again. Is that your daughter? Yes, he said. Amelia. She's 12 now. Smarter than me. But I forget to listen sometimes. Mira stepped forward slightly. That's how systems break. Julian blinked. You build them to be perfect, she continued, but you don't make room for noise, for odd inputs. Eventually, something comes along that doesn't follow the pattern, and the system crashes. He stared at her, stunned, not by the words but by the truth of them. She wasn't accusing, she wasn't challenging, she was just saying it. Miss Ellis, he said, straightening. Mira, I want to offer you something. A place here, not just as a guest, as part of the company. She tilted her head. To work for you? No, he said. To work with us, to build with us, as a thinker, as a maker. She didn't smile, didn't flinch. Will I still be allowed to break things? She asked. Julian felt something inside him crack, then settle. He smiled. Not the kind he gave investors, a real one. The first in months. Yes, he said. That's how we find out what's inside. She nodded once. No more questions. That was enough. Later that evening, after the offer had been relayed to her mother, after the stunned silence, the cautious acceptance, the phone call that made it real, Mira returned to the lab with Noah and Camilla. She didn't change clothes, didn't rehearse what to say. She just brought her notebook and stood where the breach had first shown its teeth. There was nothing left to fix, but plenty left to build. And as she sat down, cracked her pencil between her fingers, and began to draw, she didn't see the rows of executives behind the glass, or the blinking eyes of security systems logging every frame. She saw a schematic in her mind of what came next. A space where minds like hers weren't lost, where silence wasn't punishment, where questions weren't threats. She didn't know if it would work, but she was going to try. And this time, someone was going to listen. Months passed, not with fanfare, but with a steady rhythm that made everything that had happened feel real. Not like a story, not like a glitch in the system, but like something that had always been inevitable. Mira Ellis became part of Cronex Technologies without ceremony, without press releases or framed newspaper headlines. She simply returned. Day after day, riding the same bus she always had, sitting next to her mother in the front row, hands folded in her lap, backpack tucked against her side. The only difference was what waited for her on the other side of the glass. Her badge was different now. Not a visitor pass, not a red-labeled escort tag, but a permanent ID with her name in bold. Mira M. Ellis. No job title, no department, just access, full. She kept it in a small zippered pouch in her backpack and pulled it out with the same quiet precision she used to open her notebook. She didn't wave it around. She never spoke about it on the ride home. Her mother still walked beside her down the hallway at the end of every day, never asking questions, never demanding answers, just placing a quiet hand on her shoulder in the elevator. Mira's lab space wasn't large. In fact, it wasn't even a room. It was a station, tucked between two larger research bays in the Experimental Systems Division, near the edge of the building where the windows overlooked the city skyline. Her desk had a monitor slightly too large for her small frame and a keyboard elevated on risers so she didn't have to hunch forward. There was a rolling chair someone had modified with a footrest, and above the screen, someone had taped a handwritten sign in permanent marker. Mira's brain. No one admitted who had written it. Mira never took it down. She worked like she always had, quietly, thoroughly, with a curiosity that pulsed beneath everything she touched. She didn't perform, she didn't explain unless asked, but people began to notice the changes around her. The backlog in the data filtration model. She spotted a loop inconsistency in the diagnostic tool's error catch and rewrote the process tree in less than 20 minutes. The logic bug in a third-party AI classifier that had been stalling deployment for weeks? Mira flagged a hidden condition conflict in the training set and rewired the input schema from scratch, without ever opening a single manual. At first, engineers came to her station pretending to walk past. Then they started leaving snack bars, spare parts, post-it notes with equations. Some interns began consulting her diagrams like they were Oracle blueprints. A project manager once asked shyly if she could look at their anomaly detection model. She nodded, then returned it 2 days later with a page of annotated variables and a sketch suggestion for rerouting the uncertainty quantifiers. It worked. And yet outside the lab, Mira stayed the same. She still collected broken toys on the walk from the bus stop, still kept a small soldering kit in a recycled mint tin in her pocket. She still wrote in the margins of her notebook, thoughts that turned into code, that turned into maps that no one else could quite decipher, but always made perfect sense to her. Her apartment didn't change, the cracked tiles remained, the fan buzzed but didn't spin. She still sat on the floor most evenings, notebook in her lap, components scattered on an old plastic tray. Her mother no longer asked if she was tired. She didn't press Mira for details about her day or demand that she take breaks. She just brought her tea in the evenings, placed it on the floor beside her, and sat nearby folding laundry or reading a magazine. Sometimes she simply watched Mira work, not intrusively, but with a softness in her eyes that said, "I still don't understand how your mind works, but I'm proud of the fact that it does." And if Mira looked up even just once, her mother would smile. Back at Kronex, things changed too, subtly but meaningfully. Julian Crow didn't make a show of his transformation. He still ran the company with a meticulous hand, still negotiated with the same dry efficiency, still rejected 3 out of every 4 proposals that crossed his desk. But his office changed. The biggest shift was on the corner of his desk, a small wooden frame with a single page from Mira's notebook, the one she had slid across the table the day everything changed. Circuits that turned into trees, loops that spiraled like rivers, shapes that held logic without being logical in the way corporate engineers defined it. He never scanned it, never made a digital copy. He just left it there, pencil smudges and all, and when board meetings dragged or the silence in his office felt too tight, he looked at it. More than once, he found himself walking down to the lab floor without a real reason. He would linger near Mira's station, pretending to check on something, tapping idly on his tablet. She would glance up, nod once, then return to her work. She never asked why he was there. He never explained. But they both understood. Sometimes, proximity was enough. Camilla Reyes became Mira's unofficial mentor, not through formal meetings or performance reviews, but through small, constant presence. She began looping Mira into internal brainstorms, passing along raw datasets with the note, "Thought you might see something we missed." When Mira asked a question, Camilla never gave her the answer. She gave her tools, clues, questions back. And when Mira proposed a system redesign that fundamentally altered the way Kronex handled internal protocol overrides, one based on recursive feedback loops and signal-based intent parsing, Camilla didn't hesitate. She championed it. The board approved it unanimously. No one questioned the fact that the architecture had been sketched in a 12-year-old's notebook. Julian called it the Ellis method. Mira didn't react to the name. She only asked that the framework be made open source. At home, her siblings, or half-siblings or cousins, or whoever the newest child sleeping on the couch happened to be that week, started calling her the fixer. Mario, the loudest of the younger ones, once told a neighbor, "If you break something, she can make it better than new, but only if you're nice about it." Mira had smiled at that. Just a little. One day, as the house buzzed with half-cooked rice and tangled laundry lines, Mira held up an old, burned-out flashlight and murmured, "This isn't broken." Mario looked at the cracked lens and said, "It literally doesn't turn on." Mira shook her head. "No, it just doesn't know how to speak the new voltage." He blinked. "What?" She didn't answer. She just flipped open her notebook. Because to Mira, even failure was language. Even silence held shape. Even the systems no one cared to fix had stories buried inside them. Stories waiting for someone who knew how to listen. She never stopped drawing, never stopped testing new ideas. Late at night, when the windows rattled with wind and the electricity blinked out, she kept working by candlelight. She learned to measure resistance by feel. She could identify damaged capacitors by scent. She could sense when code had been written in frustration or joy or desperation. That was her gift, not just her intelligence, but her sensitivity to intention. And still, Mira didn't care for attention. When a tech magazine tried to interview her, she declined. When a documentary crew came asking for access, she ignored them. When someone asked what motivated her, she said only, "I liked the problem." That was enough, because she wasn't building for applause. She was building because it gave her peace. One evening, after everyone had left the lab and the floor lights dimmed to their nighttime glow, Mira walked into Julian Crow's office again, unannounced, quiet as ever. He wasn't there. A meeting, perhaps, a dinner. It didn't matter. She placed something on his desk, a torn scrap of lined paper folded twice. When Julian returned hours later, exhausted and distracted, he saw the note. Unfolded it. 7 words. "Thank you for seeing me. Really seeing me." He sat down slowly, held the note. And for the first time since the breach, since the silence broke, he let himself feel it all. Not pride, not strategy, not relief, but something simpler, recognition. The system had survived. But Mira had changed everything. Every system eventually settles after a breach, not just the digital ones, but the human ones too. But what happened at Cronex wasn't just recovery. It was quiet transformation, the kind that doesn't send headlines across screens or spark applause in crowded rooms. It was the kind that moves through hallways like a changed current, shifting how people speak, how they listen, how they notice each other. And at the center of that shift, Mira Ellis kept showing up. Same hoodie, same frayed backpack, same pencil-smudged notebooks, now stacked in a growing pile under her lab station. They gave her freedom, and she didn't waste it. She came in early sometimes, hours before the lights fully warmed up. Not to impress anyone, but because a question had kept her up, and her hands wouldn't stop itching until she'd tested the answer. Other times she stayed late, cross-legged in her chair, sketching algorithmic trees that spiraled like constellations across lined pages. She didn't ask for permission to build, she just built. Her presence reshaped the lab without a word. Engineers who had once debated process flows in endless loops now paused outside her corner, glancing in just to see what she was working on. A new data architect once whispered, "She codes like she's remembering instead of creating." And someone else replied, "She probably is." But even as Mira's influence deepened, she didn't change the way people expected prodigies to change. She didn't start speaking more or seeking spotlight. She didn't adopt the slick tech jargon everyone used in meetings or nod along in discussions she knew were flawed. She stayed exactly who she had always been. Curious, focused, grounded. She said no to cameras, no to titles, no to corporate fluff. She said yes to puzzles. She said yes to broken things. That's why when the security team encountered a new internal vulnerability, an anomaly no one could pin down, subtle but persistent, it wasn't a formal request that brought Mira in. It was a sticky note left on her monitor with 3 words, "You'll feel it." And she did. She didn't trace it like a normal exploit. She listened for it, waited until the data stream began to pulse in a way that felt off, a rhythm that didn't match the architecture's heartbeat. Then she followed it, sideways, diagonally, folding through layers of code like she was folding a story in half. It led her to an overlooked module nested deep in the autonomous maintenance routines. There, buried beneath standard error handlers, was a code fragment. It was a replication of the original breach. Not identical, but inspired. Not malicious, exploratory. It was signed with a single word, echo. Her hand stilled, not because she was afraid, because she understood. Whoever had sent the first message, the first echo, they were still out there. And now, they knew someone had answered. Someone who hadn't just cracked the logic, but felt it. Someone who hadn't tried to patch the silence, but listened to it. She didn't sound any alarms. She closed the terminal slowly, calmly, and wrote 1 line in her notebook. "They're watching again. That means I'm not alone." That night, she didn't go home right away. She stayed in the lab, sitting on the floor with her back against the server wall, her notebook open, the lights dimmed low. Noah found her there around 9 p.m., holding 2 sandwiches and a bottle of sparkling water. He handed her one wordlessly. She took it. They ate without speaking. After a while, he said, "Was it them?" She nodded. "What do you think they want?" Mira stared at the ceiling. "I don't think they know. I think they're waiting for someone to decide what comes next." Noah looked at her notebook. "You?" She shrugged. "Maybe not just me." He leaned back. "Good. I'd hate for them to think you were an accident." She glanced at him, then smirked faintly. "I am an accident, just not the kind they expected." The next morning, Julian Crow received a message in his private inbox. Not an alert, not a request. It was a diagram, half circuit, half story, drawn in pencil, scanned and sent from an internal workstation with no label. The only text on the image read, "Noise is a form of attention. Teach them how to hear it." He stared at the drawing for a long time. Then, without a word, he forwarded it to Camilla Reyes. She responded 1 minute later. "Let's start the mentorship program. Not for show, for real." Within 2 weeks, Cronex launched the Framework Initiative, a mentorship pipeline with no GPA minimums, no age limits, and no resume requirements. Applicants could submit a question instead of a CV, a pattern instead of a letter, a drawing instead of an essay. The program's first official hire was a 17-year-old named Hallie, who had dropped out of school at 14 and built her own logic-based encryption library. The second was a woman in her 30s who'd never gone to college but reverse-engineered security patches for open-source software in her free time while raising 2 kids. Mira didn't help pick the candidates. She just watched the board fill with names and smiled to herself. Julian stepped into the lab one afternoon to check on her. He didn't ask questions. He just stood beside her station and said, "It's working." Mira didn't stop coding. "It wasn't meant to work," she said. "It was meant to make people care if it didn't." Julian exhaled. "It's more than that now." She finally looked up. "So are you." That night, as the city glittered beyond the lab's windows, Mira took a walk through the server floor. The hum of electricity moved through her like a tide. She passed rows of machines running the systems she had once cracked open like a puzzle box. She stopped in front of a black console and pressed her palm to it. The machine didn't respond, of course. But she did. She whispered under her breath, "I'm still listening." In her notebook that evening, she wrote, "The most powerful systems are the ones that adapt to being wrong. Not the ones that refuse to break, but the ones that learn how to rebuild." She tucked it beside her pillow before falling asleep, still fully clothed, her hand curled loosely around a broken circuit she'd been rewiring for days. Her mother peeked in to check on her, said nothing, and quietly placed a blanket over her daughter's legs. Months later, Mira received a parcel at the front desk, no return address. Inside, an old radio, cracked at the edges, the inside completely hollow. But beneath the casing, tucked inside the base plate, was a folded note. One line. "Next time, you lead." Echo Mira sat with it for a long time, then placed it on her shelf beside her original notebook and her old rebuilt calculator. She didn't feel threatened. She felt understood, and she knew, without question, that whatever came next, she would not be answering from the outside anymore. She would be answering from the core. Not a ghost in the system, but part of its future. Because sometimes the most lasting code isn't the kind that resists breaking. It's the kind that keeps rebuilding, quietly, relentlessly. And Mira Ellis, breaker, listener, architect, had just begun. Mira Ellis's journey teaches us one of the most powerful truths in life. That being different isn't a weakness. It's a hidden strength waiting to be recognized. In a world that often rewards conformity, Mira refused to mold herself into something she wasn't. She listened when others ignored. She questioned when others stayed silent. And she believed in the value of broken things. Not just machines, but systems, people, and voices lost in the noise. What makes her story so impactful isn't just her brilliance, it's her compassion. She didn't rise by stepping over others or seeking glory. She rose because she saw value in things others deemed useless. She reminded us that the systems we build, whether technological or social, are only as strong as our ability to let them grow, adapt, and include those who don't fit the mold. Mira's story is a call to each of us, to pay attention to the quiet voices, to create space for the misunderstood, and to trust that the most important breakthroughs often come from the margins. Innovation isn't just about intelligence, it's about listening. Leadership isn't about control, it's about recognizing the spark in someone no one else sees. So if you've ever felt like you don't belong, like your way of seeing the world is too strange, too quiet, too different, remember Mira, you're not broken. You're a different kind of signal. And maybe, just maybe, the world is finally learning how to hear you. Where are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to Hunt Phúc Tâm Hồn for more inspiring and emotional stories that awaken the soul. New episodes every week.